really from on high. So a trio from Toronto, and 3 words, go Canucks go. Say that to the camera as well, so people watching on Vimeo will know Toronto is supporting Vancouver. And actually, I did a presentation some years ago when the New York Islanders, it was the final game, and it was the same kind of circumstance, and nobody came. Myself and the facilitator, I guess, so thank you for coming. It's good to see people. So what we're going to do is tell you a bit about our Open Data Initiative in Toronto. We've released information, of course, on the website since amalgamation, but the newest thing is the Toronto.ca Open. How many are aware of the website, Toronto.ca Open? That's good to see. So this was actually launched in November 2009, and it obviously brought us into the world of releasing raw data, which I think is a very significant event. It's interesting to note the timeline here. Actually, the kernel was planted in November 2008 when we hosted the City, a Web 2.0 summit, where we brought a lot of social media folk in and open data champions talking to us, and they really said, you know, the city should start thinking about getting that data out there. So it was really a year before Open Data Site launched, from November 2008 to November 2009, and here we are in 2011. So I'm going to run through a couple of things for you. Get the remote working, right? We wanted to really talk a bit about what we're doing for open data to start off, and then we'll sort of segue into Scott. We'll talk a bit more about mapping in general. And we also thought when we were planning this that we wanted to give you some insight to the kind of messaging we're giving to inside staff. And one of my jobs, I work with the city clerk's office, is to be a bit of an open data champion evangelist, if you like. So some of what you'll hear is the messages that we're giving inside, and we'll see if they mirror your outside interests. Are we saying the kinds of things you'd expect us to be saying? And I also like to put a request in, if you're interested in being a champion for us and saying a few messages that I can use in some of my awareness raising inside the city, I'd love to put you on tape tonight if that works out. So think about that. We have an example of one of those champions a little later in the presentation. So the first thing that we like to talk about when we talk open data is the fact that it's messy. One of the things we learned in our life, where we like things to be really neatly planned and organized and efficient and so on, it doesn't always work that way. There's a lot of things that we have to deal with when it comes to open data. And I guess that was our first lesson learned. And the expectation we could do this really quickly, some of us had, and I think we came up against some of the issues around it, which we'll talk about in a second. So what we really learned, right button all the time, is you have to do these things. Things like awareness raising, policy making, some educating, hell-raising, particular favorite of mine, pontificating, if you will, information exchanging, reciprocating, and lots of explaining. Not everyone is aware of what open data is, what it means, the value of it, and so on. And almost every audience we meet, we're starting at that level 0, if you like. So inside the city, anyway, we're doing a lot of that, and it's certainly significant to the process. When it comes to open data, what I'd like to do, this will give you a good head count as well. I would just like to start way over here in the back, perhaps this gentleman right here. If you just count off, and we'll see what number we've got here. But if you could start at number 1, just pointing to you. Yep, 1. And then let's transition. 2, 3, 4. Right here. 5. Okay, stop right at 49 there. If you folks would stand up, please, everyone who counted off. I think we missed a couple of numbers there. It was a little sloppy. If we rehearsed it, we might have done better. Okay, you represent the actual number of data sets that we have in the city of Toronto right now. So you guys can sit down. Thank you very much. 49 data sets. And this includes things like Doors Open, event data. Doors Open just passed. It's a May event, a fairly hugely popular event. So that's a significant data set for us because it really helps some application developers create some value added to the event itself. Waste collection areas, licensed child care centers, municipal licensing and standards, apartment standards, that's all one thing. Road restriction. In the question and answer, maybe we can go into some more detail of what's up now. Those that didn't count off, I'd like you to stand up now, if you would. And I'm not sure what this number will be exactly, but you represent the future. So there's a lot more to come, we hope. Thank you very much. You can sit down. So we have 49 up there now, and we do have a wish list, and that includes things like call documents for purchasing of goods and services, the, again, municipal licensing and standards, business license information this time, on-street parking permit areas, and solid waste transfer stations. And there's more to it, to that wish list. But obviously, all of the data that the city collects and so on isn't up on the website yet. And we thought it was important to maybe discuss why some of the data isn't released. We've got things like contractual issues, privacy issues, resource issues, education issues, and even issues about the issues that cause some of the slowdown. And in fact, the analogy that we make is the maturity model. And we're still pretty young, I guess. And I think most of these governments are in an early stage. The ultimate dream might be where everything is released. And in fact, access to our data programs and so on. It's just a straight gateway for folks to just get right inside the firewall and so on. That's a long ways off. That's, I guess, sort of master's thesis maturity. We're not there yet for all kinds of reasons, including this whole idea of raising awareness and getting people to understand the value and why we need to move in this direction. So maturity is very important to our process. And just last week, Jesse Hirsch spoke to a council committee, which is the Government Management Committee, and I thought I'd integrate this, just a segment, into the presentation tonight, because I think it kind of defines the messiness that we've been talking about and some of the messaging that we're getting from the outside, so coming in this case, talking to a council committee. But we've also, through various events, and I know Mark is going to be talking about some of the various change camps and so on, trying to get as much dialogue going as possible to help increase education and get some movement going on. So this is just a quick clip. It's an exchange between the councillor and Jesse in the question and answer period, so it's actually well into the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Really appreciate you coming in this morning. At this point, I'm going to ask my colleagues if they have any questions for you, starting with the councillors not sitting on the committee. Councillor Carroll?
Just tweeting the end of your speech. Mr. Chair, first of all, I'd like to just thank Jesse for coming. Never miss your comments. I listened to them on the weekend. But I want you to be aware that everybody's at a different level of understanding about open data, and has different things at stake in open data. So in listening to your speech, you could take away whatever dogma you needed to take away from it to support your own position, which is a danger. So I was wondering if you could just sort of unpack it a little bit. You're not talking, open data is fundamentally different than what goes on now. If we say, okay, we have a service, let's just have a website about it. This is a different animal that we're talking about when we talk about open government through the use of open data. You want to just sort of tell the difference in simple terms?
Open data is more an issue of infrastructure, of opening things up rather than communications or public relations. And where I tried to be very abstract is that open data is essentially a dialogue. It's a conversation. On the internet, success is generally achieved by release early and release often. The idea is to get it out there as quickly as possible. I recognize that there's issues of privacy, that there's issues culturally amongst the civil service, amongst the public sector, in terms of wanting to protect their jobs and protect what they do. So I'm not promoting a radical transparency of let's just remove all passwords to all databases instantly. But the imperative is one of speed, that the faster you can get this information out there, beyond just a website, but via community engagement, by connecting with development communities. There's, for example, a number of hack sessions that have occurred both with the city's cooperation and regardless of the city's cooperation that get some of the expertise brainstorming around what data should be released and how that data could be used. Because there is an issue of utility and application, that you can't just throw everything out there and hope that someone makes it together. It has to be conversational around what can we do to better improve the efficiency of particular services? What can we do to better improve the accessibility and awareness of certain services? 311 is a great first step, but it still requires people to sort of know what they're asking for. Whereas to put it out there and allow people to just browse could allow for a discovery process, both empowering the user, but also the city itself in terms of how they're being used.
So some interesting stuff there, to be sure. And I should have introduced Jesse Hirsch a little more formally. He's a well-known internet guy. He has a radio show on CBC. How many are actually aware of Jesse Hirsch as a sort of an advocate for these kinds of things? So the committee was asking to hear from different people, and Jesse was suggested by our clerk's office, actually, as a person who could perhaps come in and talk a little bit about what's going on. He alludes to open government, of course, and I want to make sure too that you're seeing the terms that we're using inside. So our definition of open government is the idea here of government open at all levels, allowing effective public scrutiny and oversight. And I personally am a big open data champion because I think it's really our last chance to make democracy, or do it right, I guess you could say. You can't get any more powerful than raw data. So open government is very important to how we're explaining this open data initiative. And as a matter of fact, our city clerk, and I'm quoting her directly, she's indicated that open data is a fundamental element of open government. You can see on the screen some of the pluses that she's associating. So this is one of the highest authorities in the city, our city clerk, who's talking about this in a very positive, supportive way, certainly echoing everything that Jesse is saying. Then the next step, of course, is what is the definition of open data? So we can talk about OpenGov being sort of the thing that strings us together and makes it worthwhile. I'd like to see if you can shout out what your definition of open data would be. Does anyone want to volunteer that? Give me a quick definition of open data. Okay, interesting as well. Well, here's what we're telling staff in our usual first sessions with them. It's the raw information released via the web in machine-readable format, which is getting close to, I think, what you two were talking about. And the first answer, as well as maybe some of the layers upon how we define this kind of thing. But the interesting thing is that staff don't really get the machine-readable aspect of it. Often we'll hear, well, we put out the PDF, or it's already on our website. But we definitely have to go right into the granular level, which says, yes, but that's not what we define as open data. Now, is there anything else missing from this definition, by the way? There's one word that isn't there that sometimes comes up, especially by the developer community. That's not the word I'm looking for. Yeah, free. Often you'll hear free. And that's one of the messy issues as well. So, you know, from the City of Toronto standpoint, there's some revenue streams that are generated through data. What do we do about that? I'm not a decision maker in the city. It's something, though, that's being discussed. And I think at some point we'll come to some conclusions on this. But right now, certainly, we want to at least get staff to recognize that we're really talking about that raw data that doesn't need human intervention, so it can be dealt with by computers already. And of course, what we're finding is that some of the information that is released in PDF form, developers will in fact go in and scrape that data and use it. So I guess the question we're raising is, why are we making that so difficult for folks? If they're using the data already, can we not take the extra step and get it into a format that they can use, which has value to us as well, because we can manipulate data in raw form too. So that's the definition that we're using, which I think is a significant first step for us, at least getting to people to acknowledge that information released in that machine-readable format is important. Well, that's so computers can actually work with it, so programmers and so on can actually start with the raw information already in a form that is able to be used, rather than having to take a PDF and manipulate it into Excel files and that kind of thing, so that we can actually start crunching the numbers through the machine. So when I say no human intervention, they can actually start with that data and work with it right away inside their application environment. That's not the best answer. I'm obviously not an app developer, but yeah, it's the idea that you don't have to go in and do anything for it. It's all ready to go. The other thing that we try to point out is that to a lot of the open developer community, you know, the world revolves around open data, and that's true to some degree, but we try to make the analogy more of a comet, and leading the charge is the open government, and all the other things are sort of along with that, or back to the solar system idea. The open gov side is the sun, if you like, and the other stuff is revolving around it. But certainly it is a significant component to achieving open gov. So clearly we're supportive of it in the city in terms of advocating for it, and the people that we're talking to, I get the opportunity to talk to external audiences and internal audiences. And actually the good news is really that there is a lot of agreement. There's much more agreement about things like the value of doing this than there is disagreement. And I think that's really good news. And we're not unique here, by the way. There's all kinds of cities around the world that are moving in this direction. And I think it's important that Toronto is in the game, and we're certainly trying to keep up, if you like. Licensing was mentioned over here, I think. And that's one of the big issues that I came out of a meeting this morning that was talking about that very issue, as a matter of fact. Maybe at QA we can talk a bit more about that. But all cities are having to cope with this, getting the data out and getting it available. And just last week, actually, Mark was one of the organizers of the GovCamp, and we had some speakers from Edmonton. And Ashley Cassavan actually was a person who's maybe in a sort of a similar position to me in her city. And I was interested that she kind of arrived at the same conclusion. There's a lot more that Edmonton can do, but you know, they're out to shoot, and they're certainly liaising and dialoguing and moving. And I guess movement is the key. We want to keep moving rather than stopping. Now, I mentioned Open Data Champions. This is Simon Rogers, who works for the Guardian newspaper. He actually blogs on the Guardian blog. I'm not sure if any of you noticed that, but Simon came to Canada about a year ago, and he called us up and said, I hear Toronto's involved in an open data initiative. I've seen your website. I'd like to do an interview with you and talk about it. So it was a great exchange of views. And we also took advantage of the fact that Simon was with us to use him to be an open data champion. So when I talk about that concept, I'll just run a little clip.
My name is Simon Rogers. I edit the Guardian's data blog and data store in London, the UK. And I'm an open data champion because I think it makes governments more transparent, it makes people trust governments more, and it makes the work better.
So the more of that kind of thing we can bring into our education, the better, because it's the proverbial, if you don't believe me as an inside staff person, maybe you'll want to listen to some of the people from the public, in other words, our clients. So we're not necessarily looking for long comments, we're just looking for comments that say, this is important to me, I think it's a good thing because, and you fill in the because standpoint. But what we liked about Simon was the concept of the Guardian blog, and this really is kind of our dream. We'd like to create a similar format on the city, kind of combining the Toronto.ca open with some of the other things that we have on the website to provide actually what we would call the full serve and self-serve option. And this is something our Chief Information Officer, Dave Wallace, talks about. The Guardian blog offers this. There's raw data and there's also interpreted data. So readers have a chance to, if they're so inclined, to go in and play with the data itself, or just read the basic impression that the writers have on the blog. It's a really good concept because not all people are able to use that raw data and develop apps, right? There's a lot of people that can be very engaged with it but aren't really looking to do anything with it except understand what it means to their lives and to the lives of the city. So this concept of full service and self-service is a good one. And I can't say exactly when we're going to launch our blog, but we do have a title for it, which is Data A. So really our goal, I hope that's a sign of a good name, rather than boo. But the idea, again, of citizens, communities, entrepreneurs, which are very important into this mix, as well as the developers and, of course, government. Kind of a cyclical thing happening is our end goal here. I kind of feel, in a way, you know, the Martin Luther King speech about I have a dream and I may not get there with you. Not sure how long it's going to take, but I do want to indicate there's a huge number of people in the city that are really working to try to achieve this end result. So hopefully we'll get there and get there sooner. One of the best ways, by the way, to liaise with us is these two sites. Our Twitter account, which is open_TO, or the email address, opendata@toronto.ca. And this gets you to people like myself and Gina, who aren't, let's say, the stewards of the data exactly, but we certainly try to get to some of those folks, like Scott, for example, and try to make some connections and try to address requests and see how far are we away from getting there, or if in fact we have that data and it might be coming. So this has proven to be a really good gateway for people. Mark, of course, is going to talk about some of the other community spots available. And I think one of another wishes that we'd like to see is much more interaction on the spots that Mark will talk about. And that specifically is the people that are working with the data, talking with people who need the data, as opposed to people like Gina and myself interacting in that space, because we're only helpful to a certain point. So another thing that we'd like to see is a bit more movement in that direction, so that it's really people to people that can actually get those things done. And we're certainly raising that and requesting that, and we'll see where we get. And I guess you're also going to talk about things like hackathons and stuff. So we often, I think, you get a pretty good pickup from the city to go to those events, which I think is a good sign. So I guess we'd say more, please, right? So all that being said leads us to some specifics about what you wanted to talk about tonight, which is the mapping side. So that's where we thought we'd bring Scott up. He can talk a little bit about what we've got going in that area and what's available, what might be coming down the pike, and then as we get to our questions and answers, you can ask some more specific questions. So, Scott, come on up. Thank you.